Thank you very much, Elaine, for that kind introduction. Tomorrow is VE Day. 64 years ago, Germany surrendered unconditionally to the Allies, thus ending the most horrific war Europeans had ever experienced. But one battle that hasn't ended is the debate over whether our president, President Franklin Roosevelt, did enough to save the Jewish people in Europe. It remains a highly emotional issue. Just 6 days ago, the New York Times ran a review article, which new books being covered, which revisits this question. And PBS recently ran a special program commemorating Yom HaShoah, or Holocaust Victims Memorial Day. Now, of the 11 million Jews who lived in Europe in the 1940s, 6 million lost their lives due to the final solution. Could the American president have done more to save them? Well, that question is the basis of the research that tonight's speaker undertook for 5 years of his life, practically dedicated to answering that very interesting and controversial question. Robert Rosen comes to us from Charleston, South Carolina. He's an attorney, a historian, a well-published author, a passionate speaker, a seeker of truth, and of Jewish heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, please recognize Robert Rosen.
That was very nice. Thank you. Well, if I had known that Grand Rapids was going to be this exciting, I would have stayed longer. I was not aware of that. I want to say how happy I am to be here. I'm 61 years old, so when President Nixon was being impeached, I was in my radical democratic phase. I was so happy because I really disliked Richard Nixon more than anyone, any president in my lifetime. And I watched the Watergate hearings religiously. The only good thing to come out of it was that after he resigned, Gerald Ford became president. And I would say this. When he said to the American people, which I remember like it was yesterday, our long national nightmare is over, I just breathed a sigh of relief. I mean, I was just a kid in law school, and all I can say is I felt like the country was back on track. And so, I'm here, and I'm very proud to be here because, Gerald Ford was somebody that maybe if you were a liberal Democrat you didn't agree with, but you had confidence, that he was a man of integrity. So I did want to say that. I'm honored to be here at the Gerald Ford Presidential Library Museum and the Hauenstein Center. I met Mr. Hauenstein last night. What a remarkable human being, and a man who's really done a great deal for your community, but who I learned did a great deal for our nation. I also want to thank Jim and Joan Mitchell, who sought me out, invited me to lunch, and wined and dined me and convinced me to come to Michigan. Which if you're from South Carolina, is really a long way away. So I'm staying with them, and I very much appreciate their hospitality and all the other sponsors of this program. I want to say at the beginning of this talk that this is a subject that is, as Glebe said, and I want to thank Glebe and his staff, Mandy in particular, who's shepherded me around, that is really charged up. And my book has caused a lot of controversy. I can't say that I'm unhappy about that. Being a lawyer, I like controversy. And I think it's good to debate these things. I think that it's good to get them all out in the open. But I am Jewish, and I practice my religion, and I was raised Jewish. My parents were Jewish. My grandparents all came from Europe. And so their families, who I never knew, were all, of course, victims of the Holocaust. So, that AT&T commercial where the real sweet Japanese girl calls her grandmother in Japan, we can't call our relatives in Russia and Poland and Belarus and all the places where we would have had relatives. So I will really yield to no one in, my concern about the Holocaust as a horrible event. And it's a very sensitive subject. But what I want to do is try to approach it as history and deal with the facts. I get a lot of emails. I have a website, savingthejews.com, and some of it is not very nice. I got an email last week. As a Jew, it gives me pain and terrible sadness to know about your book. Whoever makes a hero out of the worst Nazi who ever lived, Franklin D. Roosevelt. I thought Hitler was the worst Nazi who ever lived. But maybe I was mistaken. There's a lot of feeling in the Jewish community that Roosevelt let everybody down as really a bad guy. So there are some people out there who don't like what I have to say. Roosevelt was a heartless, soulless individual, the worst Nazi the world has ever known. So it is an ongoing thing, and there's a new book coming out, yet another book, and the headline in the Times was Roosevelt and the Jews, a debate rekindled. So I think this is a debate that's going to go on for a while, and I hope to be a part of it, and I hope that I can impart to you tonight some of my views and why I hold them. I'm not going to talk very long, a couple of hours. I bill by the hour. Now, I'm not going to talk very long. Then we'll open up for questions, and what we want to have is some good questions, civil questions, and some civil answers. So that's what we're going to do. This book was inspired by what you see here. This is a photograph of the Holocaust monument in Boston, Massachusetts. And for those of you who have been to Boston and know Quincy Market and know that area, it's right down the street. And it's a very beautiful monument. And it has a lot of inscriptions, and it's a very moving thing to see. And I visited it with my daughter, Allie, who's then 15, and who was at school at Phillips Academy, and is a very bright young lady. She takes after her mother. And we read on the monument this statement, and I'm going to read it to you twice, because this is really the origin of this book. By late 1942, the United States and its allies were aware of the death camps, but did nothing to destroy them. Okay, I'm going to read it again. By late 1942, the United States and its allies were aware of the death camps, but did nothing to destroy them. Now, I told my daughter that this statement is not a true statement, because I have written several history books, and I'm a big believer in things like chronology and geography, which we used to learn in school. Probably many of you in this room learned about geography and chronology. I don't know what they're teaching now. Feelings, I think. Which are not particularly useful, but anyway. And I said to Allie, we weren't even in the war until December 7th, 1941. Now, Franklin Roosevelt did everything he could, short of concocting an event in the Atlantic to get the Germans to fire on an American ship. From at least 1939 on, he was egging the Germans on. So clearly he wanted to be in the war. There's no question about that. But the fact is we were not in the war until the Japanese attacked at Pearl Harbor. So how could we have saved the Jews of Europe in 1942? Because in 1942, which was 20-something days after Pearl Harbor, we were in a state of semi-preparedness, because Roosevelt knew from 37, 38 on that he had to build an air force and an army to deal with the Germans. We even had a draft in 1940, by the way. And the draft occurred right before the 1940 election. I talk about a brave man running for president, okay? So he knew where he was headed. But in fact, we were not in the war. But when I told Allie this statement wasn't true, she said, I don't think they put lies on Holocaust memorials, Dad. And I said, well, the statement's not true, and I'm going to prove it to you. So then I got stuck with writing this book, because I was now really angry that a Holocaust monument would tell people that the Allies could save the Jews of Europe in 1942, and it wasn't true. What I found was really remarkable. What I think, and I'm in disagreement with almost all of the Jewish academics and a large part of the Jewish community on this, but I'm young and they're old, and I'm going to be fighting this for the next 20 years. I think it's one of the biggest mistaken interpretations of American history, ever.